Hello, hello, and welcome back to the Burnt Pancakes podcast. I am your host, Katie Fensky, and I'm here to remind moms that everyone burns the first pancake. Before we dive into this conversation, I want to share the sponsor of this episode. This episode is sponsored by the Mothering Journal. This is a magazine made by moms for moms, and you might have heard me interview the editor a couple weeks back. This is just the most beautiful tangible magazine for moms. It's filled with stories from, fertility through new mom life through empty nesters. So you're going to find something for every stage of motherhood. It's not only beautiful, but the stories just really help you connect to other moms. I personally have a subscription to it. I've had one for the last 3 months and I have a couple more coming. And I can tell you that when it comes in the mail, I am very excited. Brings me back to those years where I would get Cosmopolitan magazines in the mail when I was in my 20s. And there's something about having a physical magazine in your mailbox to flip through that is just so special. Not to mention, it's just gorgeous. Like the pictures in this, the stories, you can stick it on your coffee table. And it's just been a nice thing to flip through and read some of these stories when I just felt overwhelmed. So if you would like to get your own subscription, they have different options. You can check that out at themotheringjournal.com or see them on Instagram at Mothering Journal. Now, on to our episode. This week, I am sitting down with Kimberly Ward. She is a traveler, an adventurer, and a garden, but not a sailor. Yet she and her husband and their 10-year-old daughter moved aboard a 34-foot boat for 2 years and sailed from Massachusetts to Grenada and back after planning for this trip for 2 years. I loved this conversation. It was just so fun talking to a mom who just wanted adventure out of a life and didn't let family stop them from doing it. She figured out how to homeschool her daughter, what they were going to do about laundry and cooking on a boat. And it was just so fun to pick her brain. This episode, it was just so fun to talk to her that it got very long. So I am breaking it up into two parts so that you just have two easy segments to listen to. There was just so much fun stuff in here. I couldn't cut anything out. So I hope you enjoy this episode with Kimberly Ward. She's also the author of a book, Crew of Three: Bold Dreams and Detailed Plans. So she's going to give us the whole story of how she survived life for 2 years on a 34-foot boat with her family. Kimberly, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here.
I'm really excited to hear all about this crazy adventure you went on. This is so fun. So you went on a 2-year trip on a 34-foot boat with your husband and your daughter.
And
I
we
need
live to tell about it.
and live to tell about. I need to hear one. We'll just do the backstory. What made you guys decide to do this?
Actually, a friend of ours who we thought was one of those who just talked about doing things, when they showed up in our cove, we live on the water up near Cape Cod. They showed up in our cove on their boat with their 3 and 5-year-old. And at the time, our daughter was 8, and we thought, this is it. We talked about doing a trip. My husband is a sailor. He's never known a time when he didn't sail. And he mad skills. He's one of those who reads everything and experiments with everything. And so he had mad sailing skills. And we've been sailing. He's always owned boats. And so we've owned boats, and we've always gone on a 2 or 3 week vacation. We talked about doing a trip as a family, and it was kind of one of those nebulous, someday kind of things. Well, your kids grow up really fast. And so we had this 8-year-old, and we thought it's going to take us a little while to get together. And then, we want to go on a 1 or 2 year trip, and she's going to age out of wanting to be with us.
Right.
And
or get a job or yeah.
Exactly. And there comes a time when peers surpass parents, and that's normal. it's
Mhm.
hard, when she wanted to be with her friends more than us. But, we were looking at it and we're like, this is the time to do it. Are we, let's go or not go. But we wanted it based on an intentional decision rather than when you let inertia happen and you never get there.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm very impressed that you were like up for it too. I bet your husband's like, so I'm thinking like, we want to take a trip. I think, okay, we want to take a couple weeks, but like 2 years, like that's
Two
so good for you. Were
years.
you initially like, yeah, let's do it? Or did it take some convincing?
Believe it or not, I don't know if I'm just adventurous
Mm.
or naive or, like things sound really good. And it very much championed it. Once it's interesting, once I had Allie in 2004, we started getting seasick on a monohull. So we had a boat and I started getting seasick every time I went down below. And it was
Oh.
very frustrating to me because I couldn't go down below and make lunch. I couldn't go down and play. When she was a toddler, most of the time she was up in the cockpit. And we had enough entertainment up there. We had a water toy that we just played with, and she made it was a teapot with little teacups, and she used to make us drink the tea, and hours and hours and hours we could entertain her with that. But there are times when they want to go down below and take a nap, and I wanted to read to her and that sort of thing, and I just could not go down below
Wow.
without getting seasick. So when our friends sailed into our cove, and theirs had been a multi-year planning excursion. When they sailed into our cove, they were, this was a guy we worked in technical consulting. Both my husband and I used to put in Oracle systems, and we worked with this guy, and he used to pepper Michael with question after question after question. And so he was dying to take us out sailing. So when they sailed into the cove, we hopped on their beautiful, beautiful catamaran and went out for 2 or 3 days. And the guys flew the spinnaker and talked about all things boats. And I got to know his wife, who I'd only met briefly once before. And I started to learn about homeschool and how do you live in small spaces and
Mhm.
what's the family dynamic like. And so I started learning a bit from her. And all of a sudden, I realized I'm down below. I'm in the galley where she's showing me things, and I'm not seasick. So I was like, a
Mm.
catamaran, I could do this with.
What
And
is the
catamarans,
difference? Yeah, what's the
the
difference?
difference, there are two hulls on a
Okay.
catamaran.
Yeah.
And so the stability is very different. Where when you're in a monohull, you just have the one hull and you
Mhm.
heel over a
Rocky.
lot. So it's a
Oh.
very different dynamic. It's very different sailing. And my husband had to make sure that he really
Knew how
still
to do
liked
it?
sailing it. Yeah. And, but he knew, and in marriages and as parents, the compromises are just, you do things that are in the best interest of the whole family. And
Yeah.
so we started looking at catamarans, way more in our price range than our friends' price range. And we took them, we started looking at them and we're like, let's do this. And
Wow.
I started learning, what does a 1 year trip look like? What does a 2 year trip look like? And we live in the Northeast in Massachusetts. So it's a long way down to Florida. And from Florida, we could go to the Bahamas. Um, we're not blue water cruising people. We are not crossing oceans for
Okay. Okay.
20, 30, 40 days in a row. We call this island hopping.
Okay.
And so the 1 year trip, and I detail this an awful lot in my book because it's just, who knew there was a book called uh, Sailing Routes Around the World? I mean, there's like a whole book that's dedicated by Jimmy Cornell, dedicated to how do you do this? And obviously you have to take into effect hurricane season and
Oh my God.
cyclones and trade winds and currents and things I've never thought of. But my
Yeah.
husband has been reading. He's I liken him to the Malcolm Gladwell's the 10,000 hours of mastery. And my husband just started reading when he sailed his whole life, and when he wanted to own boats, he took all the Coast Guard auxiliary courses. He took the squadron courses. There are a lot of courses out there. And he took all the courses, he experimented, and then he's quite brave. So he would just go out and
Right.
try things. And he really is, he's a fantastic sailor. But other than that, the skills that are really needed on aboard a boat is he's part-time mechanic, he's part-time plumber, he's part-time electrician, and he's part-time just general all-around handyman and carpenter.
Yeah.
And you have these things, you're very self-sufficient aboard. Um, but so I started asking him, and a 1 year trip, we would go down the east coast of Massachusetts and then cross over to the Bahamas and explore. I mean, there's an awful lot to explore in the Bahamas. And so we could have spent 3 or 4 months there. And then we would have turned around and done about the same thing. Um, a 2 year trip would have looked the same. We'd go to the Bahamas, but instead of turning around, we would head to Turks and Caicos, the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico. Where do we go from there? The Virgin Islands, the British and uh, U.S. Virgin Islands. And then we came all the way down the Eastern Caribbean to Grenada. And
Mm.
then I started asking, so old, I know these things. I was infatuated with the Panama Canal. And, I thought, oh, we could all become fluent in Spanish. We could practice our Spanish and go and live in South America and, the Western Caribbean. And I'm like, how about going, through the Panama Canal? And I'm still infatuated with the Panama Canal. But once you get through in a sailboat, it's 14 days
What?
until you get anywhere. And
Oh
then
my gosh.
where you get is the Galapagos, which is not, a thriving metropolis or anything. Fascinating. But then from there, it's almost, in our size boat, it's 20
Yeah.
to 30 days
Whoa.
um, to French Polynesia. And then kind of in the middle of nowhere and
Yeah.
committed to going around the world. And I thought, okay,
Just pump the brakes a little bit.
career's not geared up for that in any way. So we sat and we decided on the between the 1 year and the 2 year trip, and I would, end up eating my words, but I said that the Bahamas didn't have enough culture. If we were going to take our daughter out of school, they didn't, the exchange rate is $1 to $1 Bahamian. So we didn't have any of the math of the exchange rates. And I'm like, they speak our same language. And I said there was not enough culture and history, but I've learned now their history very much mirrors ours. And they used to provide, looking at the Revolutionary War and the Civil War, and so slavery and all kinds of ways they mirror our history. Prohibition, they provided the
Mm.
rum runners. And it was fascinating to me. And I really I've come to just absolutely adore the Bahamas. But we decided on a 2 year trip. However, since this was new to everyone, we had a point in the Bahamas. Like once we left the Bahamas, we were pretty much committed to spending a hurricane season down in Grenada. And so we said, okay, checkpoint at about 6 or 7 months. Everybody's still on board. Are we all still happy? My husband said, we're not going to ruin our marriage over this. And and it's a very valid
That
point.
is. Yeah. Very valid.
34, 34 feet, pretty much any fissure in your relationship
Will come out.
is magnified. And
Yeah.
if we had a child who was not on board, I mean, Allie was just gung ho. And
That was
she
one of the
was part,
questions. I was like, how did she feel about that? Was she like, sweet, yeah, let's leave all my friends and be gone for 2 years?
oh my heavens, she was just ready to go. I mean,
She has a little bit of your adventurous side, huh?
and way more of my husband's adventurous side. So we all have it. My husband and I are both travelers. We when we met, we'd both separately done an awful lot of traveling.
Mm.
And so it was no surprise that we'd breed a traveler. In fact, 3 months after we were married, my husband and I took 6 weeks and sailed up to Nova Scotia, and our daughter is our Canadian souvenir. So we're going to travel, and
Yeah.
she loves it. She's just game for anything.
Mm.
And so we did have a checkpoint, and if it wasn't all it
Working
was
out.
cracked up to be, we could turn around and come back quite easily within about a 10-month span. Once you commit, you commit. Now, we had rented our house out for a year.
Oh, see, that was my other question was what did you do with your home, all your things?
Yep. We packed up our house and we moved out of it. And just about everything went up in the attic. Ended up going in one
Wow.
of the one of our offices we used as a storeroom. We left the furniture, just the very, very
Mhm.
basics. But yes, we'd been in our
Commitment.
house 10 years. Yeah. And so you pack up and you're like, okay, we got to
We're
figure this
doing it.
out.
Wow. So from the time that you got the idea to the time you actually set sail, how much planning did it take?
2 years, a ton of planning. And in fact, the book that I've written kind of fills a void of how to sail. It's not a how to sail book.
Mhm.
There's an awful lot of books of how to sail and how do you get through to different places. There are also a number of books about this is where we went, this is what we saw, this is what we did. There are very few or really none that are out there that are this is what we did to plan. And we'd had a boat, and so we were looking at a new boat. We had to make the finances work. And so we sold an RV that we'd done a lot of traveling in, and we sold the old boat, and we needed to rent out the house. Those were part of making the money work. Um, we gave up we gave up basically 4 years of putting away into retirement. So we knew we had pushed it back by minimum of 5 years because we had the
Mhm.
2 years of planning, the 2 years that we were gone, and then the year you come back, there's not exactly a lot of spare money. Um, and so we knew we were pushing retirement back by 5 years. And I went to work outside of the home for the first time since my daughter had been born. And so that meant Allie had to really be on, Allie's our daughter. Allie had to really be on board with um, it turned out she had to get off of the bus alone. I ended up working in a school, so my hours were pretty close. But she was only
Right.
8,
Mhm.
and that was pretty little. And so we made arrangements for, one day she had a piano lesson and her piano teacher picked her up. And 2 days she went with her best friend and got off the bus there. And, so it was a lot different than having mom meet you at the bus
Yeah.
stop every day.
Yeah. Did you guys have to quit your jobs when you took the trip?
We did. Now I had gotten my job, and my boss clearly knew what was going on. I
Mhm.
was I was pretty upfront with her, and
I'm out of here in
what
2
I
years.
yeah, really 2 years I'm out of here. And and it worked out quite well. They had needed a temporary human resources specialist, and it really quite worked out well. My husband, on the other hand, when we were married, we both implemented Oracle systems. However, we had each gone out on our own and had consulting companies. And one of the beautiful things is that you start a project and you end a project and you leave. And it's one of the few times in your life that if you have a specialty that you can sell as a consultant, where you have both time and money.
Mm.
If you work for yourself, you can manage that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we took two pretty major RV trips before. And, so sometimes you can schedule it for the end of a project and sometimes you can't. So he, kept having delays with his project. And he's like, I'm going, I mean, by now we're fully
Yeah.
committed. But no, nobody at his project knew this was going on. I call him a double agent. I call myself Wonder Woman during that time because, I'm working full time and
Yes.
I have a daughter and I'm mom and we're both doing projects and, getting organized. But so I was Superwoman and he was like 007 during that time. And we left Massachusetts in August and he still needed to work for through the end of or through the end of October, beginning of November.
Okay.
And so, that's a pretty long lead time to tell someone you're leaving.
Mhm.
And so when we left in August, his job did not know. Now, shortly after that, he ended up giving his notice and it was like an 11-week notice. And um, but yeah, it was a little bit of you can talk about, it's a leap of faith. It's
Yes.
just outside your comfort
Exactly.
zone.
That's exactly what leap of faith. Like that's came to my
Exactly what
mind.
it was.
So let's talk like logistics of living on a boat. So you had to plan ahead for this. On a boat, what kind of amenities are there? Like, what does it look like inside the boat? What is living? Because this was before the whole tiny home movement, right?
Correct. It's
So
kind of, and before COVID, when
yes.
everybody, moved into their small homes and moved
Hmm.
into their RVs. If you've ever been in an RV,
Okay.
it is not terribly different than an RV. And it's amazing. Living on a boat, you discover how little you need.
Yes. Yeah.
We had my husband and I had our own berth or bedroom, and with basically a queen size bed. Um, my daughter was in what's called a quarter berth, and that's kind of tucked in the back of the boat on
Hmm.
one side. There are two of them, and they basically have a full size bed, almost a full size, little tiny
Okay.
narrower than a full size bed. Um, we have a head, which is the bathroom. It's a whole new vernacular when you move on a boat. Um, and in the head, one of my prerequisites for this boat was that it had a shower indoors. In
Oh,
years
yes.
past,
Yeah.
in the years past, we'd use a little camp shower hanging to
Hmm.
a boom and up on deck. And I said, 2 years,
Not for
I
two
need a
years.
shower indoor. Yep, shower
Yeah.
indoors. And so we had a head with a toilet and a sink and a shower and everything is kind of in miniature format.
Yes.
Um, we had in the galley, which is your kitchen, um, one counter, um, a two-burner stove. My oven it's about the size of a toaster oven. So when I buy cookware for it,
Okay.
that's what I'm looking for is toaster oven size. But an oven and stove. We opted not to have electricity in the kitchen. So we used French press for our coffee maker. And we kind of always thought of that as boat coffee. And
Hmm.
it's just it tastes different. It was special to us, on our 2 to 3
Yes.
week vacations. We would always have,
Yeah.
look forward to boat coffee.
We always have
Um,
camping coffee when we go camping, and it's
exactly.
the best coffee you can drink. It's
And there's
yeah.
something very special about it. And so, if you've gone camping, it's
Mhm.
very self-sufficient.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and believe it or not, we actually cook probably better, at least as good as we do at home and as wholesome
Oh.
but it's just whole foods. When you go, it's interesting. We just got back from the Bahamas, literally less than a week ago. Last Friday night, we got back. My husband and I, after my daughter went to college and my mother moved into an assisted living, and we had decided that our retirement is 3 months in the Bahamas and then the other 8 months here. Rhythm of your day almost revolves around what are we going to have for breakfast and then cleaning
Mm.
up after breakfast and what are we going to have for lunch or are we going to go hiking or walking or to the beach or something for lunch And do we need to pack up a backpack with snacks and food and water, and then what's our plan for dinner? And everything is made from scratch. Um, so we just got back from the Bahamas, and I did note some pretty significant differences in the grocery store. So 10 years ago, which is when we were in the Bahamas,
Yeah.
you could buy flour, you could buy sugar, you could buy baking powder and baking soda, and all of those things, vanilla and all of those things. You couldn't buy cake mix or a brownie mix or Bisquick or something along those lines to make pancakes. However, you could certainly find the ingredients, and we made them ourselves. And so um, we just got used to making things from whole foods. And ironically, I'm a gardener, which does not
Work with sailing.
jive at all with the whole sailing thing. And so I laugh and I say I'm a gardener, not a sailor. And but I became that when I got into the gardening when my daughter was quite young, and she started going to whole foods, to real food from breastfeeding and formula, and she moved into real food. And I'm watching, young ladies go into puberty at 10 and 11, and I'm thinking that's just very early. It's got to be because of our food and antibiotics and growth hormones and the different things that we feed to our animals in order to quickly get them to market. And so we ended up going organic, and then I did a CSA, one of the community supported agriculture shares, where we got the vegetables. And so we were introduced to some new vegetables, and we started to use it. And then the next year we kind of upped our game, and my best friend and I did a work share. And so we alternated who had the kids, and then the other
Oh,
would get to work on the farm. And
wow.
then we started thinking, who can do this? And so she and I both have about a quarter of an acre of
Wow.
gardens now. And we've grown our own food. So idea of living on the boat and cooking with whole foods that are, ingredients that your grandmother would recognize
Mhm.
became, it was
The
part of our
norm.
normal life. So yeah, it
Yeah.
was the norm. And my daughter was 10 when we set out, and she's learned really to bake on the boat. Um, and we had no electricity in the kitchen, so there was no KitchenAid there because there was no counter space for a KitchenAid to
Yeah.
be.
Yeah.
And we had a wooden spoon, we had a whisk, we had a potato masher. What were the other accoutrements? Um, that's pretty much it. Like when it
The
comes to
basics.
baking, and you
Mhm.
had the basics, and she went through. We A friend of us gave us the boat galley cookbook, for which I mentioned in my book, and it's become a big part of my life. I didn't know I needed this cookbook, but the first 6 chapters give you substitutions that are like worth their weight in gold. Like
Oh,
you can
interesting.
make eggless pancakes. Who knew? I mean, vegans knew, but I
Mhm.
did not know.
Yeah.
And so you've got chia seeds and vinegar, and lemon juice and vinegar is a substitute, I think. Anyway, there's so many substitutes because you never have everything you
Yes.
need
Yeah.
when you're on a boat. You never have anything when you need at home, and there's generally a pop up to the store during a big planning for
Right.
a meal. But on a boat,
On a boat.
you can't just pop up.
No.
No popping to the store.
Okay, so how often were you docked versus sailing? Because you dock and you get food where you're at. How long were you
Yeah, we do not dock. We
Oh,
anchor.
okay. Okay.
And so even at home, our boat is not in a marina, it's on
Oh.
a mooring. And so we are very blessed where we live that we can walk out to a point behind our
Mhm.
house, and we get in a dinghy, and we take our little dinghy out to the boat. And so our boat is on a mooring. Um, and then we just don't love marinas.
Okay.
One of the big things is if it's ever hot outside, you aren't pointing into the wind, whereas when you're at an anchor, you're always facing into the wind, which means the airflow through the boat comes through the hatches and it keeps
Mhm.
the boat cool. So that's part of it. The other part is we just like the independence
Mhm. No neighbors.
and neighbors, and you know, if you have neighbors, they're within swinging distance, but
Yeah,
they're, you
yeah.
know, far enough away that I don't have to hear conversations, I don't have to hear their music.
Yes.
um you know, you're very on your own. And so we pardon me, we basically anchor. I'm trying to think, let me think of that trip. So we actually tied up at a marina that's also right behind our house, um, for the last week, and that was an absolute godsend in terms of, you know, we'd load the car up, drive down, and, you know, so we didn't have to traipse
Mhm.
over the marsh, load the dinghy, go to the boat. We just
Oh, got it.
loaded
Yeah.
the car, drove around, loaded the dock cart, and walked down. I mean, it's still not easy, but it didn't include mud and marsh and all of that
Mhm.
good stuff. And so we were at a marina for a week. And that was the most time I had ever been in a marina in the 10 years I'd been married to my husband. Um, from there, we actually went down to DC. And so there was no marinas between Massachusetts and DC. Once we were in DC, my husband was still traveling for work. And so every other week until he finished that project, he was flying out to Jacksonville. So we did stay tied up to a marina for 7 weeks when we were in DC, which was just marvelous. I mean, talk about the most perfect homeschool
Amazing.
classroom.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yes,
Yes.
and I grew up there, so that's my hometown.
Oh, fun.
And so I really got to introduce my daughter to the District of Columbia and
Mm.
everything that it has to offer. From there, we stayed in DC in marinas a few times because it was so cold. My husband's project got delayed a couple of weeks, and so we were leaving Virginia in November.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so we'd stay so we could plug in and have heat.
Yeah.
Um, but after we left Charleston, South Carolina, I don't believe we were at a marina until the Dominican Republic.
Wow.
And so we stayed 3 or 4 days in the Dominican Republic, all the way down to Grenada, all the way back. We stayed in the same marina. It's really quite a it's one of those rare finds that is luxurious accommodations and very inexpensive price, which that combination doesn't exist
Yeah,
other
'cause
than
I
in
was wondering
Dominican
if
Republic.
you stay at a marina, you have to pay for a spot, you, like, rent a spot?
You do,
If
you
you're
do.
mooring, you can just go wherever you
If yeah,
want?
if
Or
if you're anchored, there
Mhm.
is no cost, so that
Okay.
also fit with our budget.
Yes. Yeah, I can see
If
that.
you pick up, sometimes they have mooring balls, so they
Okay.
maintain them. Once you leave the States, you don't really know exactly what the inspections are and things. So
Mhm.
it's called ground tackle, like our anchor and our chain and everything. We're just very sure of what we have. And so when we put the anchor down, we know we will stay put, whatever the weather is.
Okay.
When you rent someone's mooring ball and their own ground tackle, you really have no
Trust
idea.
them.
So it just increases the risk.
Yeah, yeah. What about washing clothes? Did you have a washer and dryer? No? Those are those amenities that it's like,
No,
"Oh, wait a minute."
um, it's interesting. Um, your threshold for cleanliness kind of changes. And I don't know if you grew up with boys, but maybe your threshold for cleanliness changed when you had
Bad
boys.
boys, yes.
Yeah,
Or just
like
the amount
eight
of
times.
laundry I have to do. Sometimes I'm like, "You didn't wear that long enough to have that in the hamper. Like, put that back in the drawer."
Yeah, really. That back on. Clothes on a boat pretty much have to surrender themselves and walk to the laundry on their own in order to get into the laundry. So it's, yes, it's your cleanliness factor changes.
Got it.
It's like think college boy laundry. You pick it up and you're like,
This one will, I could go a few more days in this.
wear this for a
Well,
few more
hopefully it
days.
was like tropical weather and you're in bathing suits, right?
A lot of bathing suits, a lot of shorts. Any of the hiking stuff you did get quite gamey. Um, Laundry happened. You can go into a marina. There's certain places along the way that you're going to find laundry. They're cruising guides. Okay, so along with Jimmy Cornell's thousand cruising routes
Hmm.
around the world, um, they have cruising guides for everywhere you go. And so I'd pull out the book on um, Martinique before we pulled in there. And I would know that if we anchored here, we could dinghy over and there was a dinghy dock or a place to go ashore and a grocery store here, and that there was laundry here, and that was a fantastic place to get, replacement bathing suits and Tivas or Keens,
Hmm.
sandals, the beach
Yeah.
sandals. You kind of knew what was where and where you could get propane and where you could get gas and diesel um, so they have these cruising guides, and it's kind of like the Cliff Notes version of arriving into a country.
Nice. So that's where like the planning part had to come in. You always had to
Oh
kind of
yeah.
be a step ahead. What about school for your daughter? What did you end up doing for school?
Oh, I homeschooled. And that was quite honestly one of the most terrifying parts about it. People would ask me, oh, as soon as they heard we were doing this, oh,
What about school?
so you're homeschooling, what curriculum are you going to use? Okay, I'm not a teacher. I didn't really know what this word curriculum it means because it's
Mhm.
used in a lot of different ways. And I didn't know what the requirements were. So I started with her school district because we would be taking her out for fifth and sixth grades. And then
Mhm.
her plan was to return back to the school district for seventh grade. And so, I wanted to find out from
We're
them.
on
And so
track.
they have this thing called a notice of intent to homeschool. And I go through and it's this very innocuous little 2-page form. And I read all the details about what the legalities of it and what I'm responsible for. And then of course they ask that best question, what curriculum will you be using? And what are the qualifications of the people who will be teaching her? And I'm like, oh, um, I've survived this long. Is that a qualification?
I made it through school.
I made it through school. Yes, I graduated. We read a lot. So and then I ran into, I'm very much of a philosophy that God provides. And so one day I'm meeting my girlfriend who, she has a PhD in math. Her husband is a neurosurgeon. They have 4 boys who are extraordinarily bright. The youngest is my daughter's age. And so, I'm meeting her for lunch one day and I'm like, you have any idea how little information there is on what you need to teach your children for fifth grade and sixth grade? And she said, why, yes, I do. I'm like, what do you mean? Her dirty little secret is even though her 4 boys were in public school, she was also homeschooling them.
Wow. You're right. Someone was put in your path to teach you how to do this.
Completely put in my path. And so I'm
Mhm.
like, do tell.
What curriculum do you use?
It was right. And so a couple days later, I went over and I can remember sitting at the island in her kitchen with stacks of books. But she introduced me to this book. It's called Core Curriculum, and they have a book for each year that says what your fifth grader
Needs to
should
know.
know, what your sixth grader should know. And so, of course, I bought the fourth grade one because we were in that right away. And it just was fantastic. And it was very well rounded because at the schools, the only thing I was seeing was English language arts and math. And I suppose much of that is because, in terms of curriculum for schools, there's such a disagreement about history and science and some of these other areas that there's nothing that is common to each child that is learning in our country. And I found that fascinating. And I'm like, well, okay. And so the schools they'd given me a couple of math books and, they said, keep her reading. And I'm like, that's not a problem. She's an enormous reader. And they wanted to keep her tuned into the computer because, they could see the writing on the wall far before we could, that it was going to be
Mhm.
Google Classrooms and,
Yeah.
online assessments. And, we had no idea that COVID was going to come along
Yes.
and
That
be
changed
everything,
everything homeschool wise. Oh
everything.
my gosh. Yeah.
Yes.
Because now, if
It
you ask someone, hey, do you have some curriculum suggestions? There are blogs, there are Instagram,
There's a lot
there's
of stuff out
so
there
much
now.
information. Yeah,
Yeah. There's
absolutely.
almost too much information on the
It's
homeschool
overwhelming.
side. So if you think like there's no very good rule book for how to raise your kids, homeschooling was like magnified of that. And you're just like, how do I not ruin my child?
Yeah.
Um, And so she sat down and she told me that. And then I had a better idea. And I'm like, okay, so
Yeah.
these are the general, I want to cover the Civil War
Hmm.
um, for fifth grade. I want to cover in science some of these things. And, so I had some general ideas. And then I ran into a neighbor who had taught middle school, six, seven, eight, um, around our area for 18 or 20 years. And here I am, I'm at this stage of I have no idea what to do here. And he's like, I have an entire shelf, or he said, I have a number of resources for you if you want them. And I'm like, sure. I said, I'll come pick them up. And he said, bring them down. He comes down with a wheelbarrow.
Oh no. Well, these will
Oh
fit
no,
nicely in the boat.
we're gonna need a bigger boat. And so then I'm looking at these, like 12 different textbooks and supplemental books and things on social studies and more on writing and more on. And I thought, oh, dear Lord. And I had packed up my daughter's playroom. And so there was a whole stack of shelves. And so I sorted it among subject matter and I just stashed it there. And I'm like, okay, we'll get to that. And then I had a friend come over, one of my daughter's classmates. Her mother taught science at junior high, and her dad was soon to be named the principal of the elementary school that my daughter went to. And I only sort of knew them, but she and I shared a passion for gardening. And so one day I call her up, and this must have been in the spring, like not long before we're getting ready to leave. And hi, Monica, I wondered if you might want to come over and take a look at my gardens and possibly help me sort through this
Look at these books.
10 of homeschool supplies and or schooling supplies. And she told me, she's like, I would love that.
Oh.
She said, I have sat on so many curriculum committees.
Whoa.
And so again,
Yeah.
it was just like, oh, thank you. And so she and I sat on my daughter's playroom floor and we went through each subject and then she picked out what this would be best for fifth grade. This would be best for sixth grade. Nah, this one's not really, this one's kind of dated. And so, I had a whole pile to recycle. And um, amazingly, I had bought these uh, scrapbooking containers. I'd seen them on sale at Michael's when I was looking for baskets and other storage things. And I'm like, those are perfect for homeschool. And because you can tuck pencils and pens in the
Yeah.
side and you can put notebooks in. And so I picked up about 8 of them, one per subject, and then her school supplies, her pens and pencils and rulers and whatever else, school supplies. And wouldn't you know that every single thing that my friend Monica helped me pick out, it just all fit in each
Oh,
one of those. And I thought,
meant to
okay,
be.
this is what we'll do.
Mm.
Yeah. So it was but it didn't always go that smoothly.
I'm trying to get your kid to do their homework and
Do you need to call me Mrs. Mom?
yes,
Because you would never have
mm,
spoken
to your
to
teacher that
to
way.
Mrs. Sylvester or Mrs. T
Hmm.
that way. Do you
Yeah.
need to call me Mrs. Mom so we have that relationship?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was interesting. And I had to let go of the fact that I was trying to recreate her center school classroom
Right.
on our boat.
But how nice to
Um,
have the freedom to not like be in a classroom for what, 8 hours a day? Like I look at my
yeah,
kids and I'm like, couldn't they get that learning in just a couple hours and then be out playing? Like you didn't have
yeah,
to
and
spend that much time.
exploring and
Mm-hmm.
and I came across the quote and then I realized that learning and adventure or that adventure was learning.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very true. And you probably see it, with kids who can't sit still for
Yes.
that long. And it's
Yeah.
like you need to hands on and um yeah, and we could get our quote unquote classroom stuff done in 1 to 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And of course our first big stop 2 weeks after we left home was Washington, DC. And I just kind of scrapped everything. And I'm like,
There's
we're gonna go to
history.
every Smithsonian out there. And so
Yes.
we were at Air and Space. We were at, natural history was one of her favorites. And I'm like, oh, perfect. I can do the science of the life cycle in the butterfly pavilion. And, you can
Mhm.
talk about the dinosaurs that are extinct because there's a giant, you know, skeleton of one right in
Mhm.
the rotunda. And,
Like
how does
hands-on
our
learning.
social, yeah, hands-on learning. And we went everywhere from Mount Vernon to Washington Monument to the White House, the Jefferson, the Lincoln. And so she hits and she sees them, and then you just remember so much
Yeah.
more.
Not just reading
you
it in a
know
book.
yeah, and reading the Gettysburg Address on the side of the Lincoln
Wow.
Monument
Yeah.
is so much more telling, or seeing the walls of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. And the World War One museum had opened since I had lived there. And FDR and Martin Luther King Jr. Like they're just, there's like mountains of history that you can learn there. I know I did.
Okay, I'm going to take a little pause right here. I hope you're enjoying this incredible story. We're going to finish it up next week. Part two will be coming out next week. So until then, I want to remind you that everyone burns their first pancake. So just keep flipping.